Okay, so once you have your models and you've created different things, we want to do some UV mapping so we can lay the textures out. Now, the way the UV mapping works and what UV mapping is basically um, as we go and create our models, um, we actually have to lay down coordinates for how the texture lays on it. So if I actually look at this and take a look at this box that we turn into a serial box, we'd have to take that UV model and in a UV editor, we'd open it up as if it were an actual package. So with something simple like this, um, I go into my UV texture editor. So I can click, I'm going to click over here, and this is a layout that I've saved. You can also right click and create your own. If you can't find it or if you don't have a perspective UV editor layout, you just go, I'm right clicking here and holding, and I go to two panes side by side, and then I make sure under panels I can change this to my perspective camera, and I change this one under panel to UV editor. Now one other thing I want to do is we could see right here I can turn off and on different menus, and sometimes they'll float, but if I click and drag them right into here, I can add them into this little spot. So now I have my attribute editor, modeling toolkit for modeling, and click the little arrow, channel box, and I actually want to add a different one for my UVing of the model. So I go into Tools, Show UV Toolkit, and I'm going to drag this over here as well. So now I've got my UV toolkit. One other thing I want to do is I'm going to go and I want to show custom shelf. So you notice it may look like this, but if I go to View, Custom Shelf, and I have some tools that I use a lot. One in particular, so I have a rotate, and I can always middle mouse and drag these to the way I want them. I'm going to move this over to the side because I use this guy a lot now. This is a new tool called the 3D Cut and Sew. Okay. So when I have a model, I can do different types of projections, but let me just set this up first. So imagine I don't have these, and any shelves or any buttons that I want to use, all I have to do is go over it and hit Control Shift, and that will add it into my custom shelf, much like if I'm adding things into my tie set shelf from this menu or these menus up here. So the things I added primarily were the flip, which I'd hit Control Shift click and then it will drop it in. The rotate, which is that one. And then inside of my UV menu, there's an option 3D Cut and Sew tool. So I Control Shift that and it'll pop up in here. And then I can start to cut and sew it. Now, if it's a basic object, let me just show you this. Make a few primitives, create polygon, not NURBS, cylinder. And there's the UVs that it comes with. Oh, sorry about that. And I can tone down, I can turn this so I can control how much of the texture we see. This is a little grid so I can see where distortion is. All the little squares should look like cubes instead of being stretched out rectangles. And I turn that on simply by going under textures checker map. I just shut that, turn that on, which brings this up. And the idea is this is my UV texture editor, and I want to unwrap this whole thing so it fits into this space here. and that the textures, that little cubes, those little cubes we see are equal space. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I could just go and select UV map the whole object or the faces. So if I right click, hold, and go to face mode, I can grab all the center faces, which if we were to look at this in the UV toolkit we just did, under create, this is how we want to project and break these up into what's called shells. These are separate shells. So if I did like a cylindrical map, we could see that maps that out, spreads it out, and now we can see it's wrapping it like a label, and the textures are not, those cubes aren't stretched anymore. I could just now go in here, hit R for my scale tool, and just scale that down. And then that just leaves these guys. And if I right click, these are UVs, not vertices. Vertices are in the 3D world, UVs are in the UV editor. But rather than me grabbing, trying to grab this whole thing, I can either hold down Control, right mouse click when I grab just one UV. So first I go into UV mode, right click and hold UVs. I select at least one UV, if not more. And I can either hit Control, right mouse button, and say UV shell, so then I can just grab the whole shell. And that's the bottom of it we see here. As I scale it down, it has less cubes, and that's where it's filling up more space. As I scale it up, it's more cubes and a higher resolution. And if I take this one, the other way of grabbing this whole thing is I can just choose, anytime I put my cursor, it's like, how do you want to select? I want to select the whole shell. Click, and now I've got the whole shell. And that's pretty nice for just making sure you grab the whole thing. So if I grab these, scale them up, ideally I want these to be the same size. That's pretty good. And I don't want them overlapping. I want them just piece by piece with a little bit of space in between them. And then I select all of them. And you notice that when I pull everything in, these checkers don't go into other places. So I know I'm in the 0 to 1 space. 0 to 1. And now this guy is totally UV mapped. But that's a pretty simple shape. I can project as a cylinder. I can project on spherical objects, planar, and automatic tries to project from all sides and break it into a whole bunch of shells. You don't typically want to use that all the time, or most of the time, I should say. And camera-based is actually doing it so that it projects it based off of the angle I'm looking at something. So if I project this, even though it's a cylindrical object, camera-based, we see it's basically projecting it as I move the model around. It's projecting it based off of the angle that the camera is looking at it. Right? Control, Shift, or Shift left mouse button pulls up the options, and I'm just going to set planar map to, what is the default for it? Let's see. We put our cursor, X, and just apply. So if I put my cursor over it, you see left mouse button is the current settings, which is projecting on the X, middle mouse on the Y axis, which is up and down, and Z axis, which is depth. Right? So left, middle, side. Okay. And this box is representing my projection. But for something like this, I'm going to show you a nice quick tip on how to break this up. And we're just going to go over some of the tools and see how to nicely lay this out.